is the Academic Goals and Instructional Improvement Committee call to order. Can I get a roll call, please?
Yes, sir. Dr. Bofi? Present. Mr. Castile?
Here.
Dr. Davis? Here. Ms. Ellis? Here. Mr. Garvey is here. Ms. Holloway? Here. Mr. Morris?
Here.
Ms. Orange-Jones? Here. Mr. Rock? Ms. Boucher? Not in attendance. Dr. Weaver? Mr. Johnson?
Present.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. First item, please.
Your consent agenda is ready for your approval, adding items 3.1 through 3.5.
Thank you. Can I get a motion, please? Ms. Ellis? Mr. Rock, thank you. Questions or comments? Cards? Objections to the motion? No objections? Motion passes. Next item, please.
Your first item is on page 1, item 2.1, consideration of course choice providers for the Jumpstart Summers programs. The department recommendation is to approve LaSalle and Lincoln Parish School Systems as course choice providers for the Jumpstart Summers programs beginning with this summer 2021.
Thank you. Can I get a motion? Ms. Ellis? Mr. Rock? Again, thank you. Does the department have any information on this one?
Mr. Morris, just briefly, in your packet, it includes some of the information around this particular Jumpstart Summers program in LaSalle. They're looking at an aerospace elective, an entrepreneurship program. In Lincoln, they're looking at something with nursing, NCCR core, and patient care technician. And so these are activities that would happen over the course of the summer with students.
Thank you. Board members' comments? All right, thank you, Superintendent. Objections to the motion? No objections, motion passes. Thank you. Next item.
The next item is on page 3, item 2.2, consideration of the reauthorization of successful course choice Jumpstart Summers providers and a status report regarding course choice Jumpstart Summers providers. The department's recommendation is to approve the reauthorization of successful course choice Jumpstart Summers providers as outlined and receive the report regarding course choice Jumpstart Summers providers completing the second of the 3-year authorization period.
Thank you. Can I get a motion, please? Mr. Rock? Ms. Ellis, thank you. Department have any information on this one?
The only comment, Mr. Morris, would be that these are reauthorization of programs that are presently in existence. Jumpstart Summers allow students to come in over the course of the summer, earn certificates, as well as receive stipends for being there on the campus. So it's a good program. We're happy to continue facilitation of the initiative. And if there are specific questions, Mr. Bradford is here and is happy to come to the table. But that's where this item stands.
Thank you, sir. Members, any questions from Mr. Bradford? Dr. Bovee?
I'd just like to check in with Ms. Davis because I see Lafayette is listed here as to whether or not I would need to recuse myself on this one.
I don't think so.
Okay. All right. And I know that Lafayette is working hard to get ready, and students were very interested, especially from the perspective of getting paid is very attractive to students. So I've seen a long list of applicants to apply. I know we're going to be hosting some at our school, and it's exciting to see kids so excited about getting those credentials over the summer.
Thank you, Dr. Bovee. Members, any other comments? All right, hearing none. Comment cards?
No, sir.
All right, thank you. Objections to the motion? None heard, motion passes. Next item, please.
The next item is on page 6, item 2.3, consideration of an update report regarding the reopening of schools in response to COVID-19. The department recommendation is to receive the report. Backup documentation has been distributed.
Thank you. Can I get a motion, members? Ms. Holloway, second. Ms. Ellis, thank you. Superintendent, I think you have some comments on this.
Yes, sir. This is a standing item the board had requested over the course of this particular school year, just on an update on reopening. Reopening seems a little odd at this point in April. The continuation of us being open, Mr. Beasley, I believe, is one of that report. So Okay, so this is a look at our dashboard as of April 7th, just for your information. This particular graph shows the number of students that have been reported as 732,000. Keep in mind we have around 800,000 total students in our state, traditional public charter, and non-public that could report. But our data is only as good as that reporting. You can see from this particular report, we're reporting on 732,000 of those students, and 71% of our students in the state of Louisiana are fully in person all week in their brick and mortar school building. We have 9% that are in a hybrid model, and we have about 20% that are in that full virtual model. Of these students who are in that full virtual model, I feel confident in sharing that the majority of these particular students and their families have a desire to be fully virtual. They are choosing to be fully virtual, even though there are options for hybrid or in-person, face-to-face. These families and these students just feel more comfortable still in that particular format. So that is not, whenever you said 20%, don't think that is of our systems, that 20% of students have to be fully virtual. These are families who have elected that in many instances, which is good, which is the reason we set the system up as we did for this particular year. Look at devices. Really no changes from our last visit. We have been able to determine we have about 881,000 devices across the state. This is why I've been able to share with confidence that we now have more devices than we have students in the state. That is in part because of local dollars and systems, as well as federal dollars that have been able to flow into systems both through ordinary means, title means, but also because of the federal stimulus dollars. We also received a special allocation from the legislature at the end of the calendar year that allowed us to purchase some additional devices. So again, you'll see the majority of our systems are using Chromebooks for their students, followed up by laptops, and then desktops at 11%. Wanted to just take a few moments to congratulate schools and system leaders and system staffs, as well as school leaders and school staff, just for the incredible work that they have done over the course of this year, so that our students across the state of Louisiana can be safe, our employees can be safe, as well as we could have an educational system in the state of Louisiana. I don't know if we had a question, Mr. Ryan.
I'm sorry, yes, sir.
Yes, I'd like to make a comment. I would just like to take a moment to appreciate how great that our teachers, not just teachers, but coaches, administration, and staff have done this year at paying respect to both the virtual students and the in-person students. I feel that no matter which circumstance they're in, we've had a very functional school routine that very closely mirrors what early 2020 looked like. I feel like we're approaching that normal that's been referenced lately, and I feel like we're making the right steps. And so that's just a little success story.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Appreciate your comments.
So I think I shared this with you all before potentially, but the American Enterprise Institute has a Return to Learn tracker. As of March 15th, Louisiana was ranked number 7th in the nation in terms of students who were participating in daily face-to-face instruction. Also, the AEI also recognized Louisiana as having the 8th most aggressive reopening plan in the nation as of March 15th. So the Return to Learn Tracker is a tool developed by the American Enterprise Institute's Education Policy Studies Department in partnership with the College Crisis Initiative at Davidson College. And this is capturing school systems and states from across the country. So we are proud of these numbers because we've also been able to, due to our mitigation efforts that were approved this summer, due to the work that's happening in our schools, we've been able to keep our kids and employees safe as well. LSU's Riley Center, which is part of the Mass Communications Department, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Davis, but they put out the 2021 Louisiana survey, and it found that 77% of parents in Louisiana are satisfied with the instruction provided by their child's school during this particular pandemic. It said 43% of parents reported being very satisfied. 56% of parents think their child learned less over the past year than they would have if not for the pandemic. The 2021 Louisiana survey is sponsored by the Riley Center with the Manchette School of Mass Communications. The mission of the survey is to establish benchmarks as well as to capture change in residents' assessments of state governmental services. So I think that the takeaway from this is, 56% of parents say, you know what, I think my child may have learned less this year than had it been a typical school year. However, even with that, knowing what educators have faced, knowing what systems have faced, 77% of parents say, you know what, we're satisfied with what our schools have been able to do for our child or our children. Harvard University's Opportunity Insights data shows Louisiana students led the nation for math gains from May 20 to May 2021. Louisiana student performance was up 31% on the Zern math app compared to only 10% nationally. This same study found that Louisiana experienced the steepest drop in the nation at 50% after schools had been closed for 6 weeks last spring. So Opportunity Insights track progress of students nationwide who use the online learning platform created by Zern Math, and this is used in schools throughout our state. So basically what this is saying is, last spring, Louisiana had the steepest decline in the nation, but now we've had the steepest increase in the nation. So we're proud of our educators and their work on this particular issue as well.
Well, we have a question on that.
Yes, sir.
Just want to be clear, are we saying here that we've done really well or the rest of the country's done really bad?
We are saying that Louisiana has done really well,
Okay.
and our educators have done really well.
And is there anything specific we would attribute to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is our continued commitment to an educational process for our kids. I have conversations with system leaders frequently and educators, and people have been committed to finding a way to educate kids through a pandemic. And I think that has to matter.
I appreciate that.
Last week, the U.S. Department of Education released school reopening guidance to states nationwide on how to reopen schools. Louisiana's high-quality tutoring strategy is featured in the U.S. Department of Education's newest school reopening guidance. ED uses the Louisiana Department of Education's Accelerate initiative, which you all may recall is our tutoring framework, as a national example of how states can support school systems to address unfinished learning. ED released the COVID-19 Handbook, Volume 2, Roadmap to Reopening Safely and Meeting All Students' Needs to provide additional strategies for safely reopening all of American schools. So the next item for consideration in our reopening report has to do with pandemic relief funding. Just wanted to do a brief overview of where that stands. This is a really complicated process because you're working across 3 different allocations of federal dollars, and within each of those federal appropriations of dollars, you have different initiatives, and you have different buckets of funding. So you're talking about 3 different appropriations, and within each of those appropriations, different components of those appropriations. So you can see ESSER 1 was total for the nation $13.2 billion, ESSER 2 $54 billion, ESSER 3 $122 billion. You look at Louisiana's total award amount on that first allocation, which was roughly April of 2020, $286 million. Then ESSER 2, the Louisiana award was just over $1.1 billion, and that was the December of 2020. And then we look at the March of 2021, ESSER 3, and it was $2.6 billion. And so the minimum LEA allocations are the dollars that we have pushed out or are pushing out directly to systems. You see those there, $258 million, then just over $1 billion, and then about $2.3 billion. These are direct push-outs to local educational agencies. Now, these funds are available for obligation over a course of different time periods. So ESSER 1 is available through September 30th of 22. ESSER 2 is available through 2023, and ESSER 3 is available through 2024. And so this is why as we're having conversations with systems, we're asking them to think about the allocation of these funds in a multi-year process. So that we're thinking over a period of years, how can we not only deal with issues relative to the pandemic and the pandemic's impact, but how can we put Louisiana education in a better position post-pandemic as a result of the stimulus dollars. So ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 allocations. LDOE is releasing estimated ESSER 2 and 3 allocations to school systems in 2 action periods in order to, 1, meet federal requirements for awarding funds to LEAs, support strategic and coordinated response efforts through the year 2024, ensure school systems are spending down their ESSER 1 funds first, and help school systems meet the 20% requirement of ESSER 3. So you look at the specific information for each award. You have ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and ESSER 3, and you have an example of when we're looking at release of these various funds. So this is a look at ESSER administrative and set aside. So the department has a 9.5% set aside. So if you look at ESSER 1, for instance, that was about $27 million. This is what we allocated out to LEAs over, I don't know, that was before the turn of the year. We allocated that $27 million out to LEAs. We also held back an additional $1 million, and that's what we all pushed out initially to serve as the catalyst for the Accelerate initiative. So we also pushed those dollars out. So those dollars have been pushed out to systems. ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, these are the dollar amounts where we have been having conversations as a board. We've been having conversations with stakeholders and crosswalking on the federal allowability side versus Louisiana priorities, so that we can make sure that we're doing our part as a state agency to push Louisiana forward as well. So this is a look at reservations that are required under ESSER 3. The Rescue Plan ESSER Fund includes 3 state-level reservations for activities and interventions that respond to students' academic, social, and emotional needs and address the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on underrepresented student subgroups. And so these are requirements under ESSER that we have to make sure that we're meeting. One is addressing learning loss. We have to ensure that we have 5% for that. Summer enrichment, 1%, and these are minimums. After-school programming, 1%, then a level of state set aside. So that is our $247 million there whenever we're looking at our state level reservation. Proposed ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 set aside planning. So we've been engaged for some period of time talking about what might this board be interested in doing with the dollars that we have available. And so as a team internally at the agency, we have been having these discussions trying to put this in place that we can meet those needs and be able to not only again handle what's happening as a result of the pandemic, but think about how we can be in a better place post-pandemic. We have divided those into a number of different categories here: career college and service ready, equitable inclusive learning, quality teacher and student learning, effective educator workforce, strong systems and structures. And you see those dollar amounts across those 2 buckets there and the total. So the first is, so what we're looking at now, just to center this again, we're looking at the state agency set-aside dollars that we have and that we have the ability to make some decisions around as an agency and a state board, and being able to utilize those in the most appropriate way. And so the first is priority 1, career college and service readiness. We are suggesting ESSER 2 have about $6.5 million for that, ESSER 3 about $6 million for that, or just over $12 million total. And we're looking at priority work around student engagement and attendance, dropout prevention, moving IGPs to an electronic format, looking at pre-ACT and ACT opportunities, And the whole concept around redesigning high schools to ensure that they're more of a personalized experience for students, where we have this deliberate handoff between K-12 to either higher ed or K-12 in the workforce or K-12 in service opportunities. So priority 2 is equitable, inclusive learning experiences. You're looking at about $15 million across these 2 funds for this particular area. Key proposed priority work is new school choice pandemic response funding, alternative education curriculum support, school social work expansion, diverse learners, leadership development, SPED redesign at the agency level, and educator mental and behavioral health. Priority 3, high quality teaching and learning. We're looking at about $74 million allocation here, with priority work around our social studies standards and curriculum, professional development, ELA guidebook, accessibility, Accelerate, which is our tutoring endeavor, quality assessments, after-school programming for students, the arts, high-quality tutoring vouchers, literacy screening, and statewide data systems. Priority 4, we're looking at about $63 million for priority 4, which is effective educator workforce. Priority work here being recruitment and retention models for teachers, new teacher supports, pre-educator pathways, intersession professional development models, development on instructional strategies, a professional development platform, which could look like an LMS, content leader growth, the science of reading, regional literacy coordinators, English language learners, teacher certification, and special education certification. Priority 5, systems, structures, and partnerships. We have $70 million committed to this particular area. Priority work being staffing and scheduling guidance, helping systems think through more effective ways of scheduling their schools. A large portion of dollars here we have set aside for our reimagining school systems opportunity, balanced calendar pilots, parent and family engagement, strong school systems. This is our strategic planning work with school systems, strategic budget planning and management, human capital strategy. This is the Medicaid expansion work that this board has talked about numerous times, LEA technical assistance, broadband communications improvements, parent and family engagement, PPE and sanitation, and professional development. And then finally, we want to share information on summer learning programs. So as you are aware, we have pushed on the idea that summer should look different this particular year. We have asked for robust summer programming, suggesting that students should have opportunities in enrichment type opportunities, but also pull out for high-level tutoring in small groups or individualized. And so we ask systems to give us a sense of where they stand right now around that particular work and what is their summer looking like. As of now, we have about 89 of our 191 LEAs that have reported their plans. We have 6 non-public systems that have also reported plans. This is just a brief snapshot of roughly half of the LEAs. So with only about half reporting to this date, it looks like 151,000 students will be attending the program from the 89 LEAs that have submitted their survey. 73% of systems will start within the first week of June. 47% of programs will end at the end of June. 51% of programs will be offered for the full day. 79% of programs will be offered in person. 72% of programs will be using the Accelerate lessons for their intervention instruction as developed by the agency. 45% of programs will be offered to all students in the system. Here is a look, a glance at the enrichment opportunity offerings that have been reported to us. 60% of systems reporting will have music as an opportunity, 76% will have art, 34% dance, 18% theater, 67% STEM, 52% student well-being opportunities, 74% PE and outdoor activities, 22% career and college exploration, and literacy, of course, is embedded into all of this program. So, Mr. Morris, that completes my report on our reopening agenda item, standing item for this month.
Superintendent, thank you for that comprehensive report. I'm sure board members have some comments. Dr. Davis.
I have a question just on priority 2 under equitable inclusive learning experiences. What exactly does new school choice pandemic response funding mean? What is that?
Yeah, so I'm going to ask Dr. Timmel to also come to the table just in case we have specific questioning around all of these. These are just very high-level bullets for all these different items. So you're talking priority 2, new school choice. This has to do with the, there was the school choice startup dollars that previously existed that would support if a new choice school came online, so they would have the ability to have some dollars to help support their initial startup. And so these dollars would be used in that particular way so that if we have new choice schools that come online, we can help support their early entry and be successful from the start.
Thank you.
Other members' comments? Ms. Holloway.
Dr. Bromley, in regards to the summer learning program survey, 89 out of 191, did you speculate those that did not submit a survey or implementing a program?
Yes,
Because
ma'am.
that's like,
Yeah, it's just schools are busy. Schools are busier in a pandemic, and schools are busier in the spring of a pandemic. And so what we're going to do at this point is we're going to use some of our staff to do some reach out to see if we can get the rest of the assistants to go ahead and report in. So my expectation is that they have programming that they're developing. Just because the amount of conversation we've had around this, they just haven't, reported in around what that particular programming might be.
Other members? Ms. Ellis.
Yeah, I noticed on the chart that it seemed like junior high and high school students, this is how students are attending school virtually, face-to-face at the beginning. Mostly junior high and high school students are the students that are attending virtually. It's like the chart is back, completely opposite of the elementary. Just curious what we're going to do to address that. Have you guys kicked that around a little bit? I'm sure you have.
Yeah, I mean, the first is whenever we went into the school year, we said at the beginning, if you only have limited space because of physical distancing requirements, let's prioritize younger students. And we also, made that comment because we felt like middle and high school students would be better situated to handle a device. And also may or may not require the level of supervision at home that a younger student might need. And so, that's how many systems jumped into the year, prioritizing younger students. I don't think that we will see this next year, but it is where we are right now. We are concerned around, as we all are, engagement, truancy, all of those things. So we are, we may have finalized our contract around the Attendance Alliance. And so we have an Attendance Alliance that we are working with a partner university that are going to put boots on the ground to help support systems across the state. Over a dozen individuals will be part of the contract, and they'll be working across the entire state to help re-engage students and their families back into the educational process.
I do want to mention also that the tutoring materials that you guys produced have gotten rave reviews from teachers. Just the front loading of instruction, preparing for kids for next year where the gaps really are, not just extra stuff. So there's been some really, really good feedback on that. I just want to let you know.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that's a credit to our teaching and learning team. But also, we used, and you approved contracts in the past, we have used some of our, teacher leaders from throughout the state to develop that content. And it's really good. I mean, like I said, it's really good. You can go in there and you can look by grade level, by content area, and it's very scripted, and it takes a lot of the planning away from the teacher where we know they're so busy and it's provided for them. So it's really high quality, and I'm really thankful for our teaching and learning team for developing that.
Other members? Dr. Bovee?
Thank you. I really appreciate this report because I know, there's a lot of talk, especially with the infusion of the federal funds for our schools at this time. And it's helpful to see it in writing because, we're talking about a whole lot of zeros here. So I really appreciate you breaking it down for us. I think that a few years from now, we're going to look back at this as the moment, right? And so I'm really interested in talking through how we use this moment in time to help make sure that we're truly investing in making up for the learning loss over the last year, but also just thinking about the students in Louisiana who have historically lived in poverty and who have, come to our school with such great needs. And so I've been in a role before where I've had federal dollars to spend with multiple zeros and understand that it's a struggle that, especially when you're trying to meet timelines, I'm also thinking about districts like, I have Calcasieu and Cameron, who there's some things that they want to accomplish, but they don't necessarily have the services readily available to them because there's just such a strain given the weather events that they've experienced, but also COVID, right? Like there's not things readily available. Like you can't just pick up the phone and get something. We also have a range of districts in terms of their capacity for spending federal funds. So you have really large districts who have the staff that can do all the steps that are necessary relative to procurement. But then we also have some really small districts who don't have a whole lot of people who can make sure that they're getting the quotes and following all of the requirements. And so the bureaucracy can be suffocating. The bureaucracy is very important. When people make mistakes spending federal dollars, they can go to jail. The consequences are really high. And so I am interested in learning more and also in us just brainstorming and doing the best we can to support our districts to make sure that the spending that they're doing is spending that truly makes a difference for the kids. And I just haven't been in that seat before. It's, most of the time people say, well, you've got a lot of money to spend, that's not a problem. Well, it brings on a whole different set of problems, right? Because you want to make sure that you're following all the laws. And unfortunately, I hate to down on the feds, but you don't always get all the information at once, right? Because you have the law that comes from Congress, but then you've got the policies that come from the U.S. Department of Education, and they don't come neatly wrapped up in a clear package. And so I just am really interested in making sure that, I know this presentation was really focused on the state dollars and what we can do, but I do think that there is a need to streamline as much as we can and be as very clear with our districts to let them know all that's on the table. I don't want 2 years from them to get back and, somebody in Cameron find out that somebody in Acadia made an expenditure that they didn't even know was allowable, but could have really made a difference in the way that they spent their money. And I think this is a good problem to have, right? But I think it is a challenge, and it's a different kind of challenge than our school systems are used to facing. You don't typically have this surplus of funds, so it's a type of planning that our school systems just haven't had the luxury of having experience in. And I want to make sure we're doing everything we can to support them, and want to make sure that we don't add on unnecessary bureaucracy that prevents them from being effective. And so I don't know what the plans have been from the state. I'm not quite sure what supportives look like. I appreciate the invitations to be part of those conversations, but with my day job, I've not had an opportunity to dig in maybe as much as I had in the past. But feel like this is the moment and the spending of these dollars and this investment is what's going to make a difference over the next couple of years.
Thank you, Dr. Bovee. I agree. And that stress that you're wearing, we wear as well. And so it's a really good point. And we're going to do all that we can to help support them You mentioned the invitations in your day job. I do believe one of the successes that our state has had around this is just working together and having conversations together around, collective impact with dollars. And another thing is, our guidance that we have put into their hands, I think has been really good. We're also holding, technical assistance, office hours, all these types of things to continue to support. So if you run across something where you think there's an opportunity for us to step in or help or support, let us know.
So I do think that there is an opportunity to be as explicit as possible with what we know. And so I don't know if the department has had a chance you may have this already, I just haven't dug in to know. And I actually asked somebody earlier today to find out who the person is over this at the department, and I understand that it's you. So it's good to know, like I know more than I did before. So, but even like clarity in what's allowed and what's not allowed. Like I think even something so simple that if in black and white, in a however many pager that takes, if you take the things that districts are most interested in, like if you had some kind of response that districts are asking for X, does that fall in the yes you can do it or the no you can't category? I think would be real helpful because, not only do they have to look at the federal timelines, but then they're also looking at their process with their own board. And I mean, it can be tricky, right? Like, it was a vulnerable thing to come before us today, Dr. Brumley, and write out in your priorities what you plan on spending the money on. And you know that some of our school systems and some of our superintendents face some boards where everybody has an idea about how to spend the money, but whether or not that's exactly the right way to spend the money is a question. And so I would love to know like what's allowable, what's not allowable, and just make sure that when people are going through the planning process that there's no questions. Like if you're able to plan well when you understand the whole scope of what you can do. And I think that's when we're going to be most productive with this work. So
we will share. We'll share again that information and make sure you get a copy of that. And as you look through that guidance, if you see a void or a hole or an area where we can improve, please let us know.
Okay. Thank you.
Further comments, members? Ms. Lawrence Young?
Thank you very much for such a rich, informative presentation. This builds on, I think, Dr. Bofi's questions, and in a sense, maybe take a slightly different observation, but I think we land in the same place. I do agree that this is a moment because of the bureaus. And I would imagine that so much of the past year has prepared us for this moment. When I look at the earlier slides on some of the successes that we've had, I'm curious what you actually believe those insights translate to for this moment, both in terms of things we've learned that we can apply to how we think about this, and also, frankly, infrastructure that you all have already built. Like I'm thinking about some of the learning communities that have been so important to transferring lessons across the state, your weekly systems call, for example. Can you just speak a little bit to what you think from what we've done already applies to what is ahead?
Well, first, I would say that a terrible situation being the pandemic forced collaboration in a way that probably would not have happened otherwise. And so we have the ability to say, State of Louisiana educational leaders, let's jump on a Zoom and talk about X, Y, or Z. And it's not uncommon for us to have, the 200 LEAs there, but also, within that room, they're hosting these calls in conference rooms, and so they have their team with them. And so we have been very deliberate in not just talking about how do we keep kids healthy and safe, but we've been very deliberate in talking about what are best practices in education and how can we do better in the future. And so we're trying to maintain like this exposure to best practice as much as we possibly can. And yeah, you're right. I mean, it has been prompted by, in many ways, this pandemic. A very real example, would be, I asked a member of our team, to set up a call with some of our new teachers across the state. And so a month ago, we set up the call. We had, 20 or 30 new teachers across the state, just on a Zoom one evening with me. We're just talking about things. And, the first realization I had is that these teachers, they only know teaching in a pandemic. Like, their view of teaching is with a face mask and with checking their temperature and wiping down the desk every hour and all of those different things. And, in talking to them and, listening to them and trying to understand, like, why are you frustrated? If you were to leave the profession, what are the reasons why? And having a lot of those conversations. And one of the things I found is just like, they want someone to talk to. They want someone to experience this with. And so I really think that we have an opportunity to say, as a state, we're going to invest in this new teacher experience. Pulling what we know from research about the first year, second year of teaching, and trying to find a way to not only build out a framework of how to support that, but thinking around the mentoring piece of how can we ensure that our new teachers have that level of real support, not just the buddy that tells them where the copy machine is, but someone who can really invest in them to think about supporting them through some very tough years. And if you look at our numbers, we lose over 40% of teachers out of the classroom within the first 5 years. We lose over 60% within the first 10 years. And so wouldn't it be nice to say, in Louisiana, if you're a new teacher, this is the experience we want to provide for you to help you be a better teacher, but to also help with the retention. So, I mean, that's an example. We have dollars tagged here in this around this whole new teacher experience and trying to sort out how we can do a better job there. But I could tell 20 of those stories around the different bullets that we put forward to you today.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. Other members? Dr. Whitley, I have a couple questions.
Yes.
In your summary on learning modality, you identified 732,558 students reported. We have 800,000 plus students in the state. I'm just curious about the 10% or so that aren't accounted for. Where are those children? What's their status? How are we more confident that their needs are being met?
Yeah, I haven't cross-checked this recently, Mr. Morris, but when we looked at this a few months ago, some of the underreporting was more typically found in our non-public schools than our traditional public or our public charter. So I would assume if that holds true today, these are probably students in non-public schools more than they are in traditional public or public charter. And we do know that those particular students in non-public, more often than not, are in face-to-face instruction. So, if I were to just simply guess, I would say that probably our in-person number is greater than 71%, because I would think the gap there between 732 and 800 would be mostly non-public, and we know that the majority of non-public are in face-to-face instruction.
Okay. Is there any way we can get some surety there that all the public school kids are providing feedback so we know that we're addressing their concerns?
Yes, sir, and I'm fairly confident we have most of our publics that have reported. Now, I'm not sure the last time each individual system did an upload, but I know that at one point we were close to all of them reporting, but we're happy to take a look at that and see what we can provide.
Okay, appreciate that. I'd really appreciate to identify any schools that haven't reported so we can understand what's going on.
That's right.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Ms. Davis.
I was thinking of homeschooling, this might be part of it.
Okay. I have a question. in your Achieve ESSER 2 and 3 allocation slide, you mentioned support strategic and coordinated response efforts through 2024. So I really appreciate Dr. Bovey's comments and really appreciate the level of resolution the department has provided for how you plan to spend the funds and the accountability that's in place there. And really looking forward to hearing the feedback about the student engagements in the future from those investments. But I'm also curious, like I think a lot of taxpayers out there, about the support that we're providing to the districts, how those funds are being invested, and the wins that we're hearing from the districts. So going forward, should we expect similar feedback from the district? I mean, what you're reporting on is 10% of the total federal allocation, that's my understanding. So the 90% is outstanding. Should we expect some sort of feedback on how those funds are being spent, and also hearing about the wins that our students are getting from those investments? And sorry, one more thing. And then sharing those wins throughout the state.
So the second and third part, yes, we will work on that. The first part around transparency of public dollars, you know, we committed very early on that we would create domains, and we would, just from a public transparency standpoint, so that as systems budget and expend, it would populate various domains, such as, you know, summer program or intervention, or we have a host of different domains, about a dozen. And so we will be populating those, and then as systems expend their funds, it would then populate for their LEA, but also would populate a state number as well. So we'll have a general sense of where the money is being utilized. But it is a delicate balance of the legal autonomy of the LEA from the federal government and the interplay with the state agency to support that. And so that is the line we've been trying to effectively walk, and are thankful that systems are trying to walk that with us.
I certainly appreciate that different districts have different needs, and therefore they would invest their dollars differently. What about getting feedback about where these investments have yielded a high return, and we see some significant student gains? Would we expect to get some feedback on that and be shared with other districts throughout the state? So if there are innovative approaches that have been taken and have proven to be successful, then other folks can hear about that and potentially track that path as well.
Yes, sir, and we are committed to sharing best practices, so we can do that.
Thank you. Sorry, I have one more question. Priority 5, one of the key proposed priorities is parent and family engagement. So I'm really interested in what that means. I think it's really important to recognize the need to improve literacy throughout the state, and we recognize a lot of that comes from what's going on in the home. And so I'm really interested in what kind of approach we're taking here with regard to parent and family engagement.
Yes, sir. First, I would say with these high-level bullets, that at this point is what many of them are, high-level bullets, areas where we have heard some level of shared commitment to these are some areas that we need to consider, or that we as an agency deeply believe that these are areas where we should be engaged. So I cannot tell you right now that we have, here is our parent and family engagement plan with X amount of dollars. We have called it out, and we know that we need to have additional conversations around what that might need to be. So I wouldn't be able to tell you at this particular point, this is a specific plan around this, other than we know that matters to us. And so we're going to further develop planning around that.
Okay. Thank you.
And some of these bullets, you know, are in a are further down the road than others. And you know, we're having to approach this in the same way too. We're trying to think about a multi-year plan as well, as opposed to going out and expending all of our funds within a few months.
Thank you. Well, last comment on your summer learning programs survey. Just wanted you to know I'm really thrilled that 67% of that group is going to be engaged in STEM activities. So Thank you for that. Members, other comments?
Mr. Morris, I've thought of some others.
Dr. Murphy?
One is whether, do we know if any of the districts are not providing in-person learning? Or do we feel like all districts are providing in-person learning?
I don't know of a system, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Kimmel or Mr. Foltz, or someone who tracks this. I'm not aware of a system that isn't providing.
Okay.
Now, some systems are still in a hybrid model where, students come on various days, but I'm not aware where that's not an option.
Okay. And then, did learning management systems make the cut with the spending priorities? A statewide learning management system?
Yeah, we've thought about that a good bit. What you do see here, let's see if I can get to it. On the bottom, the PD platform learning management system. This particular item has to do with our ability to deliver professional development throughout the state through a virtual platform that we have not secured previously. So, for instance, if we wanted to do something, and we intend to do something around the science of reading and building high-quality content around that, or aspiring leader development, or a number of different things, we want to be able to have a platform to be able to deliver this instruction throughout the state. So that is particularly what that PD platform is. I know Dr. Chasson and her team have been having conversations around the LMS. Happy to have her come up and speak to that.
And this would be an LMS for teachers or an LMS for students?
So whenever we're thinking about the LMS, we don't think it's best at this point to say, and happy to have conversation, but I don't think we're in a position where we want to say we're going to mandate a statewide LMS. But we have had conversations around how we can help systems ensure that they have a high-quality LMS at their system level. And again, happy to have Dr. Chasson come up because her team have been working through this.
Sure, I would be interested in hearing from her. I guess my perspective hasn't been about mandating one, but more curious if there wasn't some financial benefit to offering one, from the state perspective.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would struggle. I understand why you wouldn't mandate one, because then you're just gonna upset people and it's not gonna work, right? But providing one that people can opt into, I think could really benefit us at a time like this.
Sure, good morning. So, for the learning management system statewide, we have spoken with other states and really explored what options there are for a statewide learning management system. And what our research has really shown us is that it's important to keep some level of autonomy and decision-making at the local level when it comes to a learning management system, as the needs of every system are really different in those regards. It's also important, I think, to keep some measure of competition when it comes to technology. And so, because we always want these systems, of course, to always be growing and improving from year to year. And so what we've done is we opened an RFA process, a request for applications. And so we opened that, and then it closed last week for a learning management system. And so we do have applications that we received from various companies that provide learning management systems. And so we are reviewing those applications, and next week we will be releasing a vendor guide for high-quality learning management systems to just help provide more information to systems. Within that vendor guide, we'll be providing what are some of the highlights of each learning management system to support systems in making those decisions around which they might choose to purchase. Any that end up on our vendor guide, we'll have gone through that process, and then our team will be in communication with those companies that provide those LMSs so that we can best align, so that they know what our needs are as a state, and so that we can also talk about our high-quality materials and who is using what and how to best make that available through an LMS.
Thank you, I appreciate that update. So the last question I have is, I don't know as much for the department as the board overall, but my understanding is when we passed the reopening policies, that it was reopening policies for the 2020-21 school year. And I wonder about, one, I'm assuming people are planning on following these policies for summer school. I imagine that they would apply for summer school. But I do think there's questions about the application of the policies into the 2021 school year and what that looks like. So I'm just interested in what our thoughts are about how we proceed from here.
Yeah, so we are having team discussions around that to try and make sure that systems have best practice information moving into next year. As you mentioned, these policies in bulletin are for the reopening of the 2020-2021 school year, and they were prompted by legislation at the Capitol that required this board to take those particular actions. We had already been developing as administration a set of recommendations, and so the lift to be able to prepare those and provide those to the board was not that great because we had already been working through those things in terms of best practice. So yes, this particular bulletin, it doesn't expire, but the term expires at the end of the year. So we are working to look at what considerations and guidance should we provide to schools for next year. But if the virus continues to track out as it is now in a way in which we feel like we're making progress against this virus, I don't think that we believe, nor our medical experts believe, that all the information in the bulletin to reopen schools for this year would be necessary for next year.
Dr. Romney, along those lines, you mentioned the medical experts, and I get a number of emails, and I'm sure my colleagues on the board do as well, about the updated CDC policies and mask policy and how all that applies to the children. Really appreciate the efforts that you've made to bring those medical experts before the board and testify so we get that professional medical information. Would we expect to see that group come before the board again before the fall semester so that we get the most recent updates from those professional experts before school starts?
Yes, sir, that makes sense, and we would probably be doing something like that, and that's a good suggestion. So I thank you for that. We aren't of the belief that 2020-2021 guidance should just completely roll over. We think that we're going to be able to have hopefully just a set of best practices for systems to consider, as opposed to bulletin. This is what systems have to do, and that's where we are right now with that. But if the virus shifts, needs can shift.
So, members, other comments? No other comments? Do we have any comment cards? All right, thank you. Members, we have a motion before the board. Any exceptions to the motion? No exceptions heard. Motion passes. Next item, please.
The next item is on page 11, item 2.4, consideration of the annual approval of alternative education programs and alternative education schools in Louisiana. The recommendation is to approve the ALTEP programs and schools for the 2021-2022 school year as outlined.
Thank you. Members, can I get a motion? Chair Holloway, Ms. Ellis, second. Thank you. Does the department have any information on this, Mr. Superintendent?
No, sir, I'm available for questions if there are.
All right. Do we have any objections to this motion? No objections heard. Motion passes. Next item, please.
The next item is on page 24, item 2.5, consideration of an update report regarding accountability and assessment structures for the 2020-2021 school year. The department's recommendation is to receive the report.
Thank you. Can I get a motion, please? Mr. Garvey? Second. Mr. Castillo, thank you. Superintendent, I think you have some comments on this one.
Yes, sir. I mean, this was a request from the board to place this particular item back on the agenda. This board has taken action over the course of the year, which we believe has allowed for reasonable flexibilities for school systems throughout the state. And so, an example of that most recently is some of the flexibilities around high school seniors and how systems could help support high school seniors during this particular year. Just wanted to take time to point out to the board the motion from this board that was approved in March, and that is to issue guidance to schools relative to test administration and provide communication resources to aid parents, students in understanding the importance of measuring student learning for purposes of instructional planning and student support. 2, provide as quickly as available a report of aggregate 2020-2021 test results and the extent to which results are misaligned with historical trends. 3, recommend any adjustments, federal waivers, or other forms of relief required to ensure that school ratings and scores fairly communicate school performance and achieve the intended purpose of identifying where supports and interventions are needed. Draft proposed revisions to Bulletin 111 that address accountability for 2020-2021 school year at the appropriate time. And finally, work with state legislators and BESE leadership regarding legislation proposed for 2021 regular session concerning state assessments and accountability for 2020-2021 school year. So that is the motion that was considered and passed at your last meeting, which essentially affirmed this board's collective belief that students should take their assessments. We can then get that information, present that to the board once we have that available and decisions would be made. As one specific follow-up, we were asked to look at if a specific timeline or if there was an expiration date on the ability to submit a waiver to the federal government. So our team did explore that, and we have learned that there is not a specific deadline in which we have to submit a waiver in order for that to be considered for this particular year. So we maintain that relationship with our contact at Ed, and we're able to confirm that there in fact is not a deadline on our ability to submit a waiver. So Mr. Morris, again, this was a standing item. Happy to take any questions around this particular item.
Thank you, sir. Members, comments? Dr. Davis?
So I have a question regarding a waiver for the participation rate. And so let me say, first off, as you watch states go through the waiver process with the U.S. Department of Education, I think it's pretty clear that we were correct to try to get an assessment of some sort from students in our state, because the U.S. Department of Education is routinely rejecting states that are saying we don't want to test. But one of the states that they have approved is for Colorado, which has modified their testing schedule. And they did, though, for Colorado, already grant a participation waiver for parents who want to opt out of both of the assessments that Colorado is offering. And so my question is, our dashboard says we have 20% of our students that are virtual right now. I'm just thinking about the level of stress that our school administrators and our principals have gone through this year. And this is one area where we could eliminate stress for them. So if they had, we all know, and they know the impact of a 0 on their school accountability score and how that is going to tank it. And I guess I am worried about not pursuing this waiver until whenever it is we get all of our scoring data, and then we're able to look at it and come up with a plan. That's all the way in September. And so in light of all of the stress that our educators have been under, what are our plans for pursuing and assuring them that we are going to pursue this waiver for the participation rate?
So first, Dr. Davis, let me thank you. You have been passionate about this cause for the last month, and I appreciate the conversations we've been able to have around this particular issue. And knowing that sometimes the difficulties that exist when you have, families' belief in testing and the school's belief, and how sometimes that does create some friction in this year because of the pandemic. That's exacerbated. So your point is well taken. We have not been directed to request a waiver around any particular testing. We were directed to look at, is there an expiration date around that particular waiver? And so right now around the state, we have students who are taking their LEAP test. We have tried as an agency to work with systems, and I know our team has conversations weekly with testing coordinators and systems around some of the flexibilities that we have provided, such as off-site testing or afternoon testing, or we even extended the testing windows this particular year. So we have not committed as an agency to request a waiver at this point. We have affirmed our belief that students should assess, and then we're trying to follow the motion that was approved by the board to bring that information back at a later date. So I'm sorry there's not like a clear-cut answer to that, but it is not a request that we have made to the federal government.
And so I guess I'm curious what my other board members think about this, because I think that there is a very real disconnect between what we're saying is that we value choice, and then we value the decisions that parents have made to keep their children home for this school year, while at the same time we're a board encouraging them to take the test if at all possible. And so I get that we want that assessment data, but some of our parents are not willing to risk exposing their students, their children to health concerns. And so in a sense, we are being reluctant to, we are valuing parental choice, but we're not saying whether or not we are going to punish schools and districts for the choices that their parents are making. And so I guess I would like kind of some thoughts from you on, are y'all are comfortable with that disconnect and letting that disconnect go all the way through until early fall?
Members, Mr. Castillo?
Not to speak specifically to Dr. Davis's point, but maybe to follow. The last time when we met, we were making the motion, there was a webinar that was scheduled for that afternoon where we would get some additional guidance from the U.S. Department of Education in terms of the process for obtaining a waiver. So it sounds like we've gotten that additional guidance. In terms of specifics around the value of requesting a waiver, has the department given any consideration to that? We all agree that assessments are extraordinarily important. We talked about the last time that the teachers that have done so much throughout this school year have been heroic in all of their efforts. All of our leaders have been heroic. And now that we're at this point, and testing is frankly going on right now, this week and as we speak, as we approach the summer, we're in the middle of the legislative session. Are we offering specific guidance to the legislature? I think our thought process was that as BESE and as the Department of Education, as the legislature begins to convene, that we would offer some specific recommendations around that after we completed our testing cycle. And now that we're in that now, we don't meet again until June. Has the department given some thought to it? And do you have some specific guidance for us as a board as it relates to the need for a waiver, the value of it, or the disadvantage of doing so?
Yeah, I mean, based on the motion of this board last month, and what our intent is to collect the information, disaggregate the information, and then we will be in a better position to be able to inform the board on what options they have. Because we would need to know what we're requesting. And so at this point, we would not know specifically what our ask is of the federal government, maybe based on the data, until we get directed from the board based on the options that we're able to provide to the board. So no opinion, which we're trying to ask for.
That's very
Now, legislatively, our legislative team works consistently, frequently with legislators around this and other issues. And I know that they have had conversations, as have I, with legislators who have been very interested in this particular item.
We don't return until June. The session will be over at that time, or near that time. Given the legislative interest, again, are we offering some suggestions, either from the department? I know we haven't done it before, but given that interest, what are we saying to the legislature?
Well, what we're sharing with the legislature is, and in fact, I shared this last week, sharing with them the board's interest in having students take the assessment, sharing with them the interest that once we have that information available, we're going to bring that back to this board so that the board would then have options to make decisions should a decision need to be made if something different than presently exists. And we have shared that with legislators. Bills have already been filed for this particular year. I've also shared with legislators that I know that this particular board, while this particular board has a belief in assessments, this particular board has a strong belief in the merits of an accountability system, this particular board also is sensitive to the needs of this has been a different type of year. And so that is the message that we have shared with the legislature over the last few weeks.
Another follow-up question. I didn't attend or watch the superintendent's advisory council meeting, but 2 months ago or so, that there seemed to be some interest around that. I just want to make sure that we're being sensitive to what school districts want, or at least are communicating to us. Are you hearing any either requests or desires from the various superintendents and school districts for more specific guidance or actions on the part of BESE or the department?
I don't know how to answer that particular question.
So let me. 2 months ago, I remember some specific conversations about whether or not specifically we were going to request a waiver as it relates to letter grades. And I don't know where that conversation ended. Or is that conversation continuing? Is there a specific request that we do so? Or is everyone comfortable at the superintendent level with just simply waiting until we get those results back in September?
Well, I mean, my assumption would be that they want a decision sooner than later, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the right thing to do. I mean, we are operating on the mindset of the action of the board that says, let's hit the assessments, let's see what they look like, and then we make a decision. It's in many ways premature to make a decision because we don't know what the results are. I mean, and that's not just my belief, but that's been the directive we received from the school.
Sure. And last question on this point, in terms of other states, so Dr. Davis referenced Colorado, for example. What are we seeing in terms of other states around the country that are making this decision earlier? Are they doing it based on test results, or are there other reasons that might be factoring into their decision to make a decision now or waiting until later?
States are handling it differently across the country. Our neighboring states, for instance, specifically to letter grades, and this is published knowledge, our neighboring states have waived letter grades, particularly for this year, where those neighboring states issue letter grades. That is not a decision this board has considered nor made. This board's consideration has been around, let's assess, let's get the results, let's come back to the table and see if we should take any particular action based on the results.
I'll give the floor at this time.
Mr. Morris?
Dr. Bolton?
I would just say, as someone who's been on the board for a long time and is supportive of our accountability system, that I think and personally feel, and will be supporting action in that direction as we move forward, that the assessments, especially for our individual students, are incredibly important. And so I appreciate where we are as a board relative to moving forward with our plan to have students assess, and that when the department gets the data and the appropriate time to consider that, I feel less strongly about the accountability side of it. And I'll just share my thinking behind it is, after I made the remarks that I made about budgeting, I got a text from an educator who was talking about how important this assessment data is going to be in investing these federal funds, right? And so understanding really where we are with our students and where they are with their learning is really going to guide our next steps. And so I hope that we continue to move forward as we have been with the expectation to have all of our students participate in those assessments, because the more information we have about our students, I think the better we will be able to educate them. I think about the fact that in schools every day we're taking kids' temperatures, right? Like we're getting this indicator to see how their health is. I think it's incredibly important to do the academic assessments to see where they are, because based on that information, we'll know what we need to do to move forward and have a better understanding of even how we invest funds. We have a little bit of information about where our students are relative to math because of this national study. But there are so many other aspects of their academic trajectory that we need to understand in order to move forward. So I appreciate the board supporting that motion last time. And I do hope that the legislature realizes that it's not like we are not paying attention to it. We're just not ready to make a decision because we don't have all the data in front of us.
Thank you, Dr. Tolman. Mr. Markey?
Yeah, just to check on one other issue. This is a question for the superintendent. You stated earlier that there is no deadline that the feds have set for requesting a waiver. Do you feel like you will not have the proper amount of time to look at the results that we get and develop a waiver if one is warranted?
Yes, sir. I feel like the motion that was approved by the board at the last meeting, sets us up to, once we have that information available, to be able to come back and provide you the information that you would need to make that decision. And that decision on, what we need to do, could be from here to here or somewhere in the middle. Just like Dr. Bophy mentioned, with some of the math results that we have received. Our kids are showing that they're able to be successful even through the pandemic. So, my hope would be that we would see more of that. But we don't know because we haven't had the assessment. So once we get that back, and I believe we will certainly, considering we don't have a requirement or a timeline to do that, we'll have the time to make a decision and move forward.
That seems to fit with what I'm hearing. And from what I'm hearing also with regards to the legislature, they seem to be happy with the position that we took in the statement that you could sum it up as we're not planning to play a game of gotcha with these tests that we're having the students take. And the legislature seems to be comfortable, to sum it up.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Garvey. Other members? Dr. Davis?
That's just one more clarifying question. So I know that typically student accountability data is embargoed for some period of time as the state figures out, how to scale it and all that kind of good stuff. So realistically, we're going to be getting these scores in June, at the end of June. What is the earliest date that you anticipate coming to BESE with a presentation of what that data looks like and a recommendation for how we alter the accountability system?
Yeah, I would have to get a member of our accountability analytics or assessment team to speak to the dates. I don't think it's reasonable to think that we can come to the June meeting and have that information. So I would definitely think it would be, the meeting following that meeting would be my best estimate, but I would need to talk to our team around that.
Which would be August, right? So we would maybe have a plan in August and then possibly have to request more information about alternatives and how that would change just scores. As we have seen, the accountability team has talked about how when you move this needle, how does that change distributions? So then we don't meet in September, correct? And so then hopefully maybe we might make a decision on the previous year's accountability system in October.
Again, I don't know when we will have that information. I don't think it's realistic to think we would have it in June. I would hope that we would have it fairly quickly following that.
Other members?
Yes.
Chair Holloway?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Morris. I just wanted to take a stand on a motion that we took last time and still agree with it. And Dr. Bofi and Mr. Garvey have made good points, and especially with the legislators, Jim, that has been evident with conversations that we've had with them. And of course, we saw two of them and here today, that there's trust, there's partnership taking place, and a lot of discussions, and so I stand on the agreement the motion we passed last time. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments, members? I just want to state too that I really support a data-driven decision. But I had a question, same topic, but a little different channel. When I did the Accountability Commission meeting last week, I really appreciated the presentation that was made and getting a better understanding of the method that's used and really important recognizing how education is valued as well as hurdles that are in place right now that our students need to overcome to achieve their maximum potential. I know Algebra 1 is a hurdle that's identified, and a successful Algebra 1 experience could put a student on one path as opposed to another path. Another one I've heard about is the ACT score of 17 being a hurdle. I'm interested in learning more about that. Why the number is 17 and not 16, and help me appreciate the significance of that one and the value that's placed on in our accountability system.
I may need some level of clarification, Mr. Morris. Are you speaking around the requirements to access such dual enrollment courses, or are you speaking in regards to points awarded in the accountability system?
I would say both, just trying to better understand the significance of that particular item when you consider both of those conversations.
So whenever we're talking about access to college coursework, that's not necessarily a decision that the agency makes or that BESE makes, Board of Regents makes those particular decisions. In this particular year, they've implemented some waiver procedures around ACT scores in order to access dual enrollment. And I believe I'm accurate in saying that they have approved those same waivers for this next year as well. If that hasn't been approved, it's definitely something that they're openly talking about as a consideration. One of the things that they're trying to look at is with the removal of that particular barrier, do additional students then go into dual enrollment opportunities that previously would not have qualified, and then how do those students perform once they're in that opportunity? And so they are, Regents, Dr. Kim Hunter-Reed and her team are doing a good job, Dr. Craig, of considering that and trying to track out that data to inform decisions moving forward. And I think it's important. I mean, I think we all want to know that. We all want to know what is the impact of that entrance score. And so that would be interesting to know. The decisions around points awarded in accountability have previously been set. One of the particular areas that we have brought forward is just this idea of aligning some level of points alongside the ACT score that qualifies you for TOPS Tech, which is a 17. We've also had a lot of conversations around work keys and students who are taking work keys that maybe were not originally slated to take work keys. And so that has been a very lengthy conversation, to say the least, both at Accountability Commission, but at Superintendent's Advisory Council as well. And the whole ACT piece, in terms of that accountability model, it is something that we're exploring, but we're exploring it in the context of what is a reasonable point allocation for that, but also we're exploring it in terms of context of what is the relationship between work keys and ACT, and if students are assessing in work keys that might be on university track, is that what we really want them to be doing, or is our preference for them to be assessing and rewarding points only for students who are on the university track for their ACT performance? So, I mean, that is that ongoing conversation we've been having at both SAC and Accountability Commission.
Thank you. Dr. Davis?
And just in discussing the ACT, I think Mr. Morris, we were both at the Accountability Commission when this came up, and it's kind of my recollection of the accountability system as we first started it, where our mission as a state was everybody has to be college ready, and that was all we cared about, right? So VOTEC and alternative certifications were not an emphasis in our system, and then 18 on the ACT is an indicator of college readiness. And so part of the reason for the 18 and then nobody else gets any points, so that cutoff, was because all we were concerned about was pushing college readiness. And so now that we have pivoted as a state with a recognition that vocational education and career and technical education also matter, it makes sense for us to revisit whether or not students that are scoring below an 18 on the ACT, if they ought to be given points in the accountability system.
Yeah, I think for us as the agency in our discussions, it's been more like really just around that 17 number and TOPS Tech, as opposed to anything below that. But, we are looking at that particular number, but as you know, and you were there, the more impassioned conversation has been, our proposal, which has been if a student is on the university track, we believe that the score that should be considered for that student's accountability purpose should be the ACT, not the work keys, because that's checking for work readiness, and ACT is checking for college readiness. And so that has been the conversation that we have been having and has been impassioned at both accountability and superintendent's advisory council.
Other members? Dr. Browning, what should this board expect on this topic at the June meeting?
Well, again, I don't believe that we would have the data available for 2020, 2021 accountability purposes. Our hope, however, is that our year's worth of work to further strengthen a strong accountability system, that would be in a position where we could bring that to the board at that particular time for your consideration. Specifically, all of the work around K2 that we have done over the course of the year to build an accountability model for K2, which presently doesn't exist, and that's the void in the entire version, the 12 model. And then the other point is just the strengthening of that high school component, both with strength diploma, with ACT, and specifically around the whole idea that I talked loosely about earlier, but just being more deliberate with how we're thinking about the high school experience for students and their readiness for what's next, and then aligning an accountability system to be the lever to actually do that thing. So our hope is that whenever we come to you in June, we would be able to take our proposals that we brought to the Accountability Commission for you for consideration. And Accountability Commission a couple of weeks ago unanimously endorsed our K2 plan. Accountability Commission also unanimously endorsed our high school plan, but asked us to come back around the ACT work keys piece and some of the points awarded or not awarded on the strength of diploma piece. So we have an accountability meeting coming up at the beginning of May. Our hope is to take information back at that point where we felt like at there was a need, and then stay on track to hopefully bring that to BESE for June consideration.
Thank you, sir. Members, any other comments, Dr. Brophy?
Yes, so we had staff come to the table. I think it was Dr. Davis that asked the question of the timeline. So I don't know that you actually got to speak to it.
I'm here if needed, but I can't speak to the timeline. We actually will not receive all of our test data this year until end of July due to the extended assessment window that we put in this year due to the late starts of some of our school systems. So we did change to a total different month of testing since some systems did not open until after Labor Day this year. So that would put the actual reports coming in end of July. We will immediately begin disaggregation at that point. We should be able to turn out, starting in August, reporting, looking at it, starting to run simulations. It will take a while to run simulations and do the historical trends that have been asked for in your motion of March 9. So just wanted to clarify that the actual testing data would not come by end of June. It would just come, it would come toward end of July.
So that would mean probably at the August meeting, we would not have a clear understanding of what we would do. So this will mean the first time we'll see something to make a decision will be in October, and that's assuming we don't require additional information after we look at it. So it could be the November meeting then. It's a very real possibility then.
I'm not sure when your
So
August.
it would be a December meeting if we don't meet.
I'm not sure when your August date is. I'm sorry, I don't have that in front of me. But I you know, we're going to be rolling that data. It will start coming in, some of it prior to the end of July, but hopefully we will get it as soon as possible. But that's what they're telling us from the contractor, that end of July, they're guaranteeing it to us.
Thank you.
I just want to point out that school performance scores typically do not come out until October anyway. Is that correct? And
That's
sometimes I
correct.
think they've actually even been later than October.
We had been working on a projected date for a few years of coming at end of September, but that has been no promise to that. That has just been something we've been aiming for and really never had a chance to get there before the pandemic came into play.
And so when will so part of doing the assessment this year was to let our teachers know where our kids are, because they need to know where the gaps are in order to address remediation. So
Correct.
when will our schools get individual LEAP scores? So not even worrying about
Right.
the accountability system. When will our teachers know how their kids did?
Right, we've had this conversation. We're very aware of the need to start dropping student file reports to districts as soon as they get to us. Meaning, if we get some fourth grade scores in ahead of July, the end of July, we will begin the processing of those reports right then, so we can start dropping them into files at the district level. We're not going to hold up until everything's in place. As soon as we can verify, that is the report, that is clean, we will drop it for districts to start looking at that. Those that are actually testing on a computer this year will actually get the results sooner. So our third and fourth grades are really the only grades that are paper-based. So we should be getting reports in on 5th through 8th, and ahead of any paper tests that would be coming. So we will have, I would consider, some cycles of reporting versus one big load. That's what I'm hoping for.
Thank you.
Mr. Garland?
Yeah, that's another question for the superintendent. We've mentioned a couple of times when the scheduled BESE meetings are as of today. If part of your department, the accountability part in particular, is ready to bring advice or report to BESE about waivers in a month earlier than what our next scheduled meeting would be, would you be prepared to respond to a special call BESE meeting on this issue? If we were to call one in September or late August, something like that. If one department is ready, would the rest of your staff be ready for a special call meeting?
We can certainly adjust to the needs and requests of the board on that, if that is necessary. I think an important comment two important comments that have just been made though. One, as Ms. Noel shared, we are dropping with systems information as we have it. So, once we, have the assessment results, once we know that they're, certified, they're clean, we're going to be providing that to systems. The other point I think is also worth noting is just Dr. Bogey's point around systems don't typically receive these SPS, DPS until October, sometimes November anyway. So no matter how we approach this, the likelihood is that our schools will go into the next session, the next school year, without this particular decision having been made. So that's just where it stands based on the direction of the board from the last meeting of the decision that was made.
Other comments, members? Mr. Castillo?
I just have a broader observation that we obviously test for a purpose, and that is to aid instruction and gather the information we learn from it. It's maybe a much broader conversation with the fact that we're getting data at the middle of the next school year based on performance of the previous school year. It always begs the question of how helpful it is. I'm a firm believer that assessments are important. I think that accountability is very important. But I am questioning the timing as we're emphasizing the fact that we get it so much later. I do recognize that it's a rolling basis. Some schools get them sooner. But systemically, it seems a bit challenging, the fact that we may not get this very meaningful data until later in the following school year. Just an observation.
Well, I mean, the original reason why anyone tested or assessed is to understand the level of knowledge of the student and then respond to that information. And so first and foremost, testing results are to guide instructional decisions, and I think that the case you're making has been a concern for many years. I think a place where we have an opportunity to see improvement is in some of the K2 work that we're doing, which calls for these periodic progress monitoring efforts that inform the school. I think that another opportunity that does hold promise is thinking around innovative assessment. But innovative assessment in the agency right now is nowhere near a place to be able to fully launch something like that. We're still very much in learning around how that can work. I do think as we move more and more students to, from a technological standpoint, to online assessments, that's going to speed up that process. And I think it's a conversation we need to be having more often with our testing vendors around this particular piece so that we can get that information back as quickly as possible.
Is there anything that we can do to help? Because again, I'm a firm believer in knowing where we are, having data, making data-driven decisions. But we want to have it sooner than possible. Is there anything that we can do to help facilitate that, Mr. Superintendent?
Well, just from a summative assessment standpoint, not formative, which is ongoing, but from a summative assessment standpoint, the systems are going to want as much instructional time ahead of that window as possible because they want to do well in that accountability model, which is why this particular year we put forward a window that allowed for additional time because of COVID and hurricanes and a number of other things. I do believe that we will see more fluidity in that window in future years as we work through opportunities such as K2 accountability, as we look at trying to move to scale, if possible, an innovative assessment model which is not fully developed at this point. as we see some systems move to more nuanced school calendar that doesn't concentrate particularly all of the time away from school during 2 particular months. And so, we're seeing some of that, and I think that as a board, if we come to you around testing windows and cycles and opportunities, just affording us the opportunity to share rationale why we're doing that and why those need to be fluid and giving that consideration would be important.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Castillo. Members, other comments? Ms. Jones?
Just a follow-up to that, I really appreciated, just follow-up, I appreciated your response to Mr. Castillo's very real concern. Do we have a sense across our system which districts or networks have some of the most thoughtful formative assessments and who have been relying on that over the past year and will continue to over the next 6 months that we can learn from? I'm just curious to track that.
Yeah, I don't know that we would have that information available. Happy to have a conversation with you offline to think through that.
And perhaps there's maybe I don't even know if that's really the right question. I'm just trying to understand how are some of the systems, I imagine there must be some innovation happening. I'm just kind of curious what we know or
Well, one of the most important things just to me as an educator personally is just the whole concept of progress monitoring. And knowing periodically over the course of the year where are our students and then what interventions do we have in place. And so a couple things there. Again, I'm going to speak to the K2 accountability piece. We are not just trying to build K2 accountability to have score. We're trying to build it as a lever to improve outcomes for kids, but we're also trying to build it in a way that supports a process of improvement at the school, of making sure you have information, and that walks alongside the information that we're dropping around literacy strategy and literacy effort, where we're trying to build out processes around once we know where a particular student is, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, that we're then able to line up instructionally what needs to happen for that individual child. And so this is a leap for systems to be able to do this. Some places do this well, but it's not something that we see routinely across the entire state of places that are doing this well. And even within systems, some schools might do it well, but that doesn't mean the entire school. So this whole idea of real-time data and real-time response is something that we are very interested in, and we're trying to work to support that.
I have a question along those lines with regard to the real-time data and response. I know you explained to me, Dr. Romley, that a lot of these tests are electronic now, but there is a written component to some of them as well. I was wondering, in order to expedite that information, is there a way that the vendors could provide us with electronic information quicker and then hold on to the written component through the letter data so we could respond to students' needs quicker?
Yes, sir, and Ms. Noel can also speak to that. We do receive some of that, but we are going to be leaning in a little bit more in this particular area around turnaround times, and hoping to see some movement there and improve that.
Thank you. Members, other comments? Good conversation on this topic. We have a motion before the board. Any exception to the motion? No exceptions heard. The motion passes. Next item, please.
The next item is on page 25, item 2.6, consideration of an update report regarding the K2 literacy coaching pilot. The department recommendation is to receive the report.
Can I get a motion, please? Dr. Bosby, Ms. Ellis, a second. Thank you. Dr. Roman?
Yes, sir, Mr. Morris. Dr. Chasson is coming to the table. She is going to provide the board with just some high-level updates on our literacy coaching pilot. As you all are aware, the legislature approved an allocation for us of a couple of $2 million to build a pilot program around literacy for this year in a number of schools. We have been doing that. We have some initial lessons learned. That's guiding some of our larger strategy around reading, and in fact, it has also cemented in many ways the fact that we believe, especially in our early grades and with some of our schools who have been most challenged, the opportunity that a literacy coach affords. And we have likewise made a significant commitment through SuperApp to fund those coaches in a collaboration with systems across the state. So Dr. Chesney.
Good morning once again. So I've tried to provide some regular updates throughout this year, and today I'm happy to share some preliminary findings from our literacy coaching pilot. And just want to first give a few reminders about the coaching pilot and the updates that I've been able to provide to you all. That this is from money from the legislature dedicated to this specific work for this year. And this is also based on recommendations of the Early Literacy Commission, which has been made up of stakeholders and literacy experts from across the state. And so a lot of this work is built upon that foundation that the Early Literacy Commission provided to us. And so I'll first ground today's update in this mission that we have now formed around our statewide literacy strategy. And that's that all Louisiana students will have improved literacy outcomes through high-quality instruction and interactions by an effective teacher who is supported by leaders and families. And I think this mission statement around our statewide literacy strategy really helps to ground out all that we do. And of course, this is connected and aligns with our priority plan. And so a few reminders about our K-2 literacy coaching pilot and how it situates across the state. We have two networks. So we have two literacy coordinators on state contract, one in the north and one in the south of the state, who support the 13 schools, and we have the school system served here. And if you all recall, these are schools that are identified as most in need, CIR and UIRA schools. And we selected these schools to represent different types of school, different demographics, and that they were also using different choices in high-quality instructional materials. And so I'm happy to share with you all today the development of what we've identified as our 4 literacy pillars in alignment with our statewide literacy strategy from some learning experiences from this year from our literacy coaching pilot. And you can see the 4 pillars listed out on this slide. And these 4 pillars provide the framework of literacy resources and initiatives moving forward. And so next I'll take a deeper dive into each of these pillars and connect how the pillars stem from the preliminary findings of the pilot. So our teachers and our leaders participating in the pilot we've conducted surveys throughout the year. And so this data is a result of those surveys from the participating teachers and leaders. And at the beginning of the coaching pilot, 46% of teachers at the school struggle to interpret data for monitoring student progress and informing their instructional decisions. And at mid-year, we found that only 20% were still identified as struggling to interpret and utilize data, and 80% of the teachers then felt confident in analyzing, interpreting, and using data to drive their decisions in the classroom. And so this leads to our first preliminary finding of the pilot, is that goal setting is an essential part of literacy progress. And so we made a choice to use one screener so that we could best compare the same measures across the pilot. So we used the Acadience reading screener. This was done in the fall, winter, and spring. Literacy coaches led teachers through data analysis to determine where each student performing below benchmark needed to be provided with interventions. Teachers provide interventions through targeted small group instruction daily, with progress monitoring occurring every 2 to 3 weeks. Our literacy coaches have worked side by side with our teachers in this work and have monitored the progress of school goals and individual student goals. These all lead into our school literacy plans that are developed from these literacy goals. We've also seen across the pilot instructional shifts occurring in the classrooms. Teachers are utilizing high-quality instructional materials to enhance their core instruction. They're making shifts around the scientific research that explains to us how children learn to read. And we're seeing more and more small group instruction, which is so important when it comes to a child's literacy progress and development. Teachers are providing targeted interventions and extensions based on individual student needs. These instructional shifts that were observed in the pilot have led to our next preliminary finding, which is that both time and materials matter. It's very important that schedules are made to allow for literacy blocks of time, both keeping core instruction using high-quality materials sacred, and also providing dedicated time in a schedule for those intervention and extension opportunities based on individual student needs. We've also utilized 2 different reading trainings. Some of our schools chose to use letters trainings and some chose to use AIM Pathways training. Both are very similar and focus on the science of reading and foundational reading skills for students. And the teachers and leaders who have participated in this training in the pilot have obtained, practiced, and applied the new learning within the classrooms. Both of these programs have pre- and post-tests built into them with formative checks along the way. And you can see just a little of this teacher and leader data on this slide. Our teachers and leaders performed at a 52% of content knowledge around the foundations of reading at the beginning of the pilot. And their formative checks now average an 86% in their content knowledge around the foundations of reading. So all of the participants are on track to completing the year-long AIM and letters training. These are a few quotes from teachers and the principal around their experiences with the reading training that's been offered. Teachers have found that it's really important that the training is very hands-on. They are learning in their training and then applying in their classrooms. So they're getting that practice built in. The principal quote also centers around how including his 3rd grade teachers he's found to be very important, as well as including his special education teachers and his English language learner teachers. The literacy coaches, of course, have gone through this training as well and have also been trained on how to conduct one-on-one coaching conversations with their teachers and how to facilitate common planning times in teacher professional development. So that's another really important piece of the scheduling, not just to hold sacred that literacy block time for interventions and enrichment, but also that teachers and classes are scheduled in such a way that allows for a common planning time where teachers of those classes can come together during a planning period, look through their student data and make some instructional decisions based on that data in a collaborative setting. This is a quote from a system leader around the type of support that is expected from the literacy coach and what they've seen as an impact in their school. And so the evidence from the pilot around both the letters and AIM training and the job embedded ongoing support from the literacy coach has led to the next preliminary finding of the pilot is that intensive professional development is necessary. And so the finding here is that this is a combination of both that intensive training on the foundations of teaching reading, which we've used both letters and AIM Pathway and found both to be very successful in the pilot. Alongside of that, training the literacy coach and the school leaders in that same training, as well as how to coach the teachers and how to provide that job-embedded professional learning community setting. And the next piece, another area that has been observed in the pilot is around involving families and communities in students' literacy acquisition. And through our teacher and leader survey, we found that at the beginning of the pilot, 45% of teachers identified themselves as feeling prepared to engage with families around literacy. And by mid-year, 96% of the teachers participating felt confident in engaging with their students' families about literacy. We also have a quote on this slide from a principal about working with local business leaders to fund and provide books to build home libraries so families can support reading at home. And so this is a great example of how leaders and teachers can make those home and community connections that we're finding to be so important with students' literacy. This leads to our last preliminary finding, that families are essential. This pilot further highlighted the need to increase these efforts. And so we've done this in a few ways by forming a family literacy engagement work group, which develops a comprehensive strategic plan for schools and systems to develop and implement activities to improve family literacy engagement. We've also worked on developing grab-and-go activities that teachers or families can grab and use right away with children. We'll also be presenting sessions at Teacher Leader Summit focused on family engagement. And we continue to collaborate with family literacy engagement experts to fine-tune our guidance. And so we have launched some of our literacy resources on our website. We now have a Louisiana literacy library that is highlighted on our main page right now on our website. And Reading Revival is our tag that just identifies our literacy campaign, and the whole idea is that we are joining together as a state to initiate a true reading revival as we work together towards Louisiana literacy. Some of the resources that we've provided, just to highlight, is a school system literacy roadmap, which is a month-by-month guide for school system leaders to look at every month and gather ideas and information around what different things they should be thinking about and planning for as that literacy leader of the system. We've also released some classroom best practices, which are just informative for both teachers and for school leaders who are observing and coaching those classrooms around what we should be seeing and hearing in those classrooms around best practices in literacy instruction. So in looking ahead, we have 13 coaches in our pilot this year. We are asking those coaches in those pilot schools to continue along with us next year into year 2 so that they can really stay one step ahead in this journey. It's been a really amazing experience to action research and field test here in our own state across these schools. But we'll also have about 300 literacy coaches statewide at our CIR and UIRA schools. In some earlier updates, I've talked a little about our Clsc funds, which is our federal literacy grant funds. And so they are able to help fund 300 literacy coaches in our schools that have been identified as CIR or UIRA, so our schools in most need of those extra resources. So it's really exciting that we are now expanding to 300 literacy coaches statewide. You'll also notice that we are also expanding to K-12. And so although the pilot initially focused this past year on K-2, you saw that earlier quote from the principal, we found that it's really important to include third grade teachers. We have some schools that have pre-K on their campus who have pulled in pre-K throughout the year. And so these coaches are now going to span K through 12 as we look to further expand our guidance and resources beyond just kindergarten through second grade into next school year. And at the Teacher Leader Summit, upcoming at the end of May, we also plan on releasing quite a few different sessions around our literacy work. So really helping system and school leaders around developing their local literacy plans, diving in deeper and training folks on our implementation guidance, really working with our system and school leaders on how they can best engage families, and of course, always including that science of reading training, that intensive training that I talked about earlier. That's been a really crucial piece of the pilot. So we're very thankful for the funding that has been provided by the legislature this past year and a lot of that groundwork that has been laid for us by the Early Literacy Commission. And we're looking forward to having the end of year data from our student assessment so that we can see what kind of movement we've had with our student outcomes and use that data to just further refine and grow our statewide literacy strategy.
Thank you, Dr. Jason. If there was any comments, Dr. Bowden?
So one more just for my fellow board members and people in the audience is that United Way of Acadiana participates in Dolly Parton's Imagination Library and sends books to children, because I believe it's before they get into school. And so I think any opportunities we can to actually get books in the home, this is an incredible example of one. I also oftentimes think about hospitals and how they send babies home from send babies home, the diapers and such, and that if there was a way we could provide books to go home with families at that time, unfortunately, some of the kids we don't see again until they appear in our public schools. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for us to come together to expand on that. The other piece is just that push on the K-12 piece. I'm glad to hear about all of this work really, but also the understanding that unfortunately children have gotten out of K-2 and not known how to read. And so really thinking about how we can dig in middle school and even high school to expand our student skills, because it's just incredibly important and unfortunate that they didn't get that foundation while they were young. So thank you so much for this work. I look forward to seeing how we continue to improve in this area over the years.
Other members, Dr. Davis?
I just have a couple of questions, and the first one is two parts. And let me just say, I'm really excited about our focus on literacy. And my question is, the first question is relating to funding. So our CLSD funds, what's the expiration date on those funds, and what are our plans for how to continue this program after those dollars are gone? And right now, our literacy coaches are only going to be in our most struggling schools. So if we see that this is really working, how are we thinking about scalability to a statewide program and paying for those extra literacy coaches?
Yeah, those are great questions. So our CLSC grants, we've actually received 2 grants, and so both are 5-year grants. So we received one in 2019 and one in 2020. Both in the fall. And so those are both 5-year grants. And the purpose of those grants, a lot of the resources is for these schools that are the most in need, and that's what the funding is for. I will say when we think about literacy coaches outside of these schools, I think that is a local decision, because I think the needs of every school are quite different. And I will say that some schools may not be in as much need of a literacy coach as others. The point of the literacy coach is to focus on literacy and to build the capacity of teachers. We know that lots of times these schools that struggle the most are because they have teachers who might possibly be in more need of those extra supports as well. And so when we think about the literacy coaches, I think they are best placed in those schools that need additional resources, but may not be the best fit or the most appropriate use of human capacity at schools that might be higher performing. So I think there's a lot of local decision there.
Okay, so that dovetails nicely with my second question, which is about what Mississippi has done. So I know back in 1998 on our NAEP scores, Louisiana and Mississippi, we each had about 17% of our students reading on level or advanced. And now Mississippi is at the national average for NAEP reading scores, but we're still 9 points behind that. And so my question is, was Mississippi's approach to implementing the science of reading a statewide approach, or was it targeted to just the neediest schools? And then also kind of what other aspects of our program match what Mississippi, who basically is kind of a leader when with the science of reading. So how close are we matching what they're doing?
So we have been in conversations with former leaders and current leaders from Mississippi, the folks who have really led a lot of that important work there. And so a lot of our strategy is very similar to Mississippi in placing these coaches. So when I think about the similarities and the differences, they offer state level coaches, which you'll see in we have our non-cadet through our coordinators, and that's what we've also found to be a really essential piece, is what support and training are those coaches receiving. I'll also say that this coaching pilot has been about the coaches and what the coaches are doing, but you've also heard through my presentation today, there are many initiatives pushing out here through this literacy strategy that are not dependent on the coach. And so there are lots of instances where the school leader is absolutely just as important as a coach, and it's about building the capacity of the teachers and the leaders, whether that coach is there or not. So we are being very intentional in developing these resources and materials that they can be used with a coach placed at the school, but they are also just as useful if your school does not have a coach. These literacy resources and guidance and the training is for every school in the state.
So that gives me a lot to think about, so I may have follow-up questions for you after the meeting as I think through that. But my last question is, you kind of answered it, that this, what you presented to us today is very coach-centric and teacher-centric. Do we, which is good, but do we have data on the student outcomes? So have we looked at reading levels for the kids as their teachers progressed through this pilot coaching to see that what we're doing in the classroom is producing outcomes?
So those are the findings that we'll hopefully have in the next month or so as we collect that end-of-year student data. So that is why we purposely use that single tool. Everyone is using the same literacy screener and tool throughout the year so that we can measure that progress throughout. So the schools are about to collect their end-of-year data, so we will have that soon. Thank you.
Ms. Holmes Jones?
Thank you. First of all, thank you for your leadership. This is extraordinary, promising, and certainly addresses an area where, frankly, we've had some challenges for a while. So very excited to see where all of this goes. My question to you is, the number 300, can you share a little bit more about the significance of that? What would scale look like here? Is the goal to get much bigger than 300? This is sort of the next stage of the pilot. Just curious, it still feels like a fairly small amount, but perhaps I'm sure there's very good thinking. I'm just curious about it.
Yeah, so one of the things that's been important is that school systems have to want literacy coaches, and they also have to have, we refer to it as some skin in the game. With these literacy coaches, we want these literacy coaches to be treated as true coaches and their time to be best utilized and held sacred for what they're intended to do. So we've taken a lot of steps to do that, and the first step is that school systems through Super App have had to say, we want a literacy coach in our CIR/UIRA school. They've also had to provide some amount of a match. And then back to Dr. Davis's question about sustainability, is that the way this grant is intended to work is that it is a pullback model where for next year we are providing the majority, if not all of the salary, and then in years to come we'll pull back. So that school systems and the schools themselves have to be really invested in this work in order for it to have an impact on students.
Thank you for that. Members of the comments. Chair Holloway.
Yeah. Thank you. This is exciting, Dr. Chasson. Truly appreciate the department and the efforts made towards this Foundations of Reading. I do have questions, and Dr. Davis asked about the capacity and the funding source and the continuation, sustainability actually. And so the funding source concerns me because I want consistency. Because I've already said that last meeting about we start up a program and then we back off. And years ago, we've had literacy coaches and the Foundations of Reading was so powerful, but then it just went by the wayside. Do you project that could happen? Especially when you're going to pull back. And if it's not, of course, mandated or asked for the capacity of this to continue on, there's like I take a deep breath saying, okay, we're on a road here to have sustainability and progression of kids, growth, etc. Which leads me into the universities. And I asked that last time, is there a partnership or are there discussions and questions being asked of universities for letters training, AIMS training, whatever it may be, that eventually your capacity or your sustainability could continue if universities would be on the bandwagon with what you are promoting and bringing forward. And the other question I have is, how does the rollout look? What grades will be next in this? And is it considered also a pilot?
Those are great questions. So first, a little more about sustainability. When we think about the role of any great coach, the whole idea is that that coach is building capacity in the people that they're coaching. And so is this sustainable over time? Absolutely. It depends on how important it is to people and how much they prioritize it at the local level. It also depends on how much we prioritize it and support it at the state level, for sure, in time to come. And so those coaches, I can see a world where we have a coach at, most of our CIR, UIRA schools in the next 2 years, and then possibly over time, as those coaches build capacity in their teachers, as those teachers are trained in the science of reading, as those teachers build their instructional practices, those coaches it may be the local decision that those coaches are able to be scaled back, or maybe they have less across their school system. Maybe they're supporting more than one school in a different way. So I think the models could definitely change through the years as we see funding sources shift and the amount of funding available shift in time to come. And I think to your point, that is where our teacher prep programs become so important in our university partnerships. We do have an ELA collaborative this year, which I think has been very successful, and it is some of our school system leaders, our literacy team, some of our experts here at the state level, and our university partners from our teacher preparation programs are coming together regularly to discuss how our teacher prep candidates are being prepared to teach ELA in the classroom. So we've had some really fruitful conversations and discussions in this collaborative this year, and I do think we'll see some real shifts in the partnership in how our universities are best preparing their candidates for our classrooms.
And my last question was about the rollout in regards to the grade levels. What's next coming forward? Are you releasing that yet?
So we got K2 out now. So K2 is out, and so next we'll start to see in the pilot, we'll see the inclusion of those 3rd through 12th grade coaches. And so into next school year, we'll begin to release additional guidance for 3rd through 12th grade.
I just want to say that this is so exciting because most effective schools, as you know, and educators know, that they do a lot of these skills and foundation strategies. And also, Dr. Bromley, you mentioned intervening, assessing, and prepping, and understanding where our students, their baseline, and moving forward. So I wanted to add this earlier when we talked about assessments and accountability, how your effective schools understand assessing children and having data, Ms. Morris, always having data in front of them to know where to take the child from to where they want to go. LEAP is not the only assessment tool that schools or educators utilize to know what direction to take. And at this moment, coming at the end of April, they already have this vision for their children of where am I going to be with this child come May and moving forward into August. So the plans are already being made. LEAP is part of that assessment, especially with this foundation that's taking place to move forward in the upper grades. That's an addition to making certain that we're reaching the goals and the needs of the children, and that we are on target with how to move the students forward in their growth. Thank you.
Thank you, President Holloway. Other members? I wanted to follow up briefly on Ms. Jones' comment about scaling up. To your point, it is about individual districts' interest in engaging with the department, but I'm sure you have expectations. So I'm curious what your expectations are with regard to what that number 300 is going to look like next year. And also, is there any limit to what that number could be?
Well, there is a limit because there are absolutely funding limitations with our Clsc grant and those funds. So I could see the amount of literacy coaches scaling some in the next few years as we have systems identify, find success with the amount and see success across the state with the amount of coaches that are out there. So I could see it increasing the following year in next year's Super App request. and see more coaches in those CIR to IRA schools. I also think in the next few years, there's a possibility that our school systems now have their stimulus funding, and as they reallocate their resources and make decisions based on student needs, they may decide to add some literacy coaches in as well. We do have some systems who have reached out and said they already have literacy coaches in place. They're already using a source of their funding for it. Maybe they're outside of CIR, UIRA schools, and can those literacy coaches also join in our professional learning communities and be supported by the state? To which, of course, we say, yes, we welcome all literacy coaches that systems want to send to our trainings.
Thank you. Members, other comments? Dr. Brummer?
Thank you. Just to make a point, like literacy coaches alone will not solve what we believe to be in many ways a literacy crisis in our state. There are a number of different endeavors for which we have to ensure that are happening. It includes pre-service teachers, as mentioned. It includes training for teachers who are already in the profession. It includes that accountability formula piece. It includes standard protocol, intervention, extension. Family and community partnerships are also a part of that. So the literacy coach piece is just one element of what it's going to take to make this work. You know, I've also heard a couple of comments around sustainability, and those are really things that we should consider. But as a former district superintendent who had to reduce budgets significantly, up to almost 40% in one system and significant dollars in another, I'm just a little concerned that we could become too stuck on the notion of sustainability, that we would be paralyzed by the fear of sustainability, that we wouldn't do things that could work. And if we end up getting progress from this endeavor, then we figure out the next piece. We find a way to make it work. And so I just don't want us to be paralyzed by the idea of sustainability while we also recognize it's important.
Thank you, sir. Members, other comments?
I have a question.
Dr. Weaver?
Has there been recently or even in the past an effort to incorporate some volunteers in the community for being trained as literacy coaches?
So that's not a part of this pilot. A part of this pilot is identifying literacy coaches who are really highly skilled, highly qualified to do that work, and that's also been something we have found in the pilot, that the selection of that literacy coach is of utmost importance in the success of that literacy coaching model. But I will acknowledge that it is very important, I think, to have both family and community involvement, and that's why we selected that as one of the pillars. We think that community involvement is a really important piece that can help to not only bolster the efforts, but I think to this conversation, sustain some of those efforts over time as we see the community support.
I guess I was thinking more about maybe retired teachers, but I mean, I realize there are problems with dentistry, folks like that.
Yeah, I think Dr. Weaver, an example of that would be in the literacy guidance that we're putting out and that strategy, the community engagement piece. That could be a part. Was visiting with a superintendent yesterday who is pulling in some retired teachers to deliver some of the accelerated tutoring guidance that we provided. So I thought that was a really good way to think through that and to deliver that. These particular coaches, however, are going to be more full-time employees that serve as mentors, masters, teachers to those career teachers.
Members, other comments? Thank you, Dr. Chason. Members, we have a motion before the board. Any exception to the motion? None heard. Motion passes. Next item, please.
The next item is on page 51, item 4.1, consideration of revisions to Bulletin 137, Louisiana Early Learning Center licensing regulation regarding early learning center licensing, child health and safety, and technical edits. The department recommendation is to approve as notice of intent revisions to Bulletin 137.
Can I get a motion, please? President Holloway, Mr. Garvey, a second. Thank you. Superintendent, we have any comments on this one? Public comments? None heard. Any exception to the motion? No exception heard. Motion passes. Next item, please.
The next item is on page 63, item 4.2, consideration of revisions to Bulletin 139, Louisiana Child Care and Development Fund Programs regarding federal monitoring findings and early learning center requirements. The department recommendation is to approve as notice of intent revisions to Bulletin 139.
Thank you. Can I get a motion? Mr. Rob, Mr. Castile, second. Thank you. Superintendent, do you have any comments? Comments? Thank you. Any exceptions to the motion? None heard. The motion passes. Next item, please.
The next item is on page 78, item 4.3, consideration of revisions to Bulletin 140, Louisiana Early Childhood Care and Education Network regarding performance ratings in response to COVID-19. The department recommendation is to approve as declaration of emergency revisions to Bulletin 140, effective April 21st, 2021, for a period of 120 days or until adopted as final rule, and to approve revisions to Bulletin 140 as notice of intent.
Thank you. Motion, please. President Holloway, second. Mr. Garvey, thank you. Superintendent. Closing comment? None. Thank you. Members, exception to the motion? None heard. Motion passes. Next item, please.
The next item is on page 83, item 5.1, consideration of the summary of public comments and agency response concerning public comments received in reference to the February 20th, 2021 notice of intent regarding Bulletin 1903, regulations and guidelines for implementation of the Louisiana law for the education of dyslexic students. The department recommendation is to receive this regard regarding the revisions to Bulletin 1903, authorize BESE staff to submit the summary report to the legislative oversight committees, and direct BESE staff to proceed with the final adoption of the February 20th, 2021 notice of intent regarding revisions to Bulletin 1903 at the appropriate time.
Thank you. Superintendent, comments? Public comments? Yes. Members, can I get a motion for this item? Mr. Garvey, second. Mr. Rock, thank you. We've got one public comment card, Ms. Catherine Petty. She's representing herself. She wishes to speak. Ms. Petty, if you would step forward. There she is. Thank you, sorry. Please go ahead and welcome Beth.
Thank you. Can you hear me? I can't hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Good morning, President Holloway, Superintendent Brumley, members of the board. Thank you, Ms. Davis, for the invitation to give representation to my letter with concerns regarding the proposed changes to Bulletin 1903 published in the Register. I'd like to thank you and the board for continuing to recognize the importance of the unique educational needs of our students with dyslexia. For my follow-up comments, I'd like to just briefly highlight the main points that are in my letter and offer some thoughts for your consideration. As you read in the attachment of the comments that I have from others and from my own personal experience discerning the struggles and searching for solutions to a dyslexic child's instructional needs as a parent is labor-intensive, emotionally exhausting, and often an economically challenging process, not to mention a learning wasteland for your child. Bulletin 1903 brings attention to the desperate need for early identification through screening of all students, not only to determine risk, but to ensure early intervention. However, there needs to be a more assertive process from this early screening to the next steps of gathering assessment information and determining characteristics of dyslexia when risk is identified. A screening tool, rather than waiting for an SBLC, a parent, or a student's teacher, as suggested in the revisions, should be the impetus for this progression, as most parents and teachers are not familiar with the characteristics risk factors associated with dyslexia. As educational leaders, students and parents rely on us to ensure the best learning pathway for their children. Unfortunately, part of the challenge in uncovering the cause behind my own children's struggles was not having consistency of knowledge among educators and healthcare professionals to create a solid educational plan once the diagnosis was made. Bulletin 1903 rightly recommends early screening at various grade levels, though these screenings should be more comprehensive in their skills of assessment following the science of early recognition, and for the moment be conducted at the beginning of the second semester of kindergarten. The initial at-risk screening should be followed by a prompt assessment in order to abate the detrimental and persistent results of waiting for academic failure. Taking this assertive approach would establish a strong level of certainty in the identification of our dyslexic students, a measure of confidence to parents and teachers searching for clarity, and provide an instructional blueprint for the highly qualified instructor's intervention. A significant portion of this Bulletin 1903, specifically in sections 103, 105, 107, 109, and 111, contain descriptions that apply directly to the trained knowledge and skill expertise of the specialized professionals in the field of dyslexia, otherwise known as Certified Academic Language Practitioners, sometimes called CALP, and Certified Academic Language Therapists, also called CALTs. It is my recommendation that these specialized professionals play a strategic role in the implementation of Bulletin 1903, be positioned for intimate involvement in the screening and assessment process, but more importantly, be the instructional planners and supports for our dyslexic student population.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for your comments and your recommendation. Board members, any comments? Dr. Davis?
So is there someone from the department or perhaps even Ms. Petty, I don't know what your position is and what groups you represent, but why doesn't our current screening and evaluation process for dyslexia work right now? Help me understand, like, what's driving the changes behind what's going on?
Yes, Dr. Davis. First, let me be very clear that I am not a dyslexia specialist, not that that was in question. What happened is that in order to make the revisions, some of the things that were accomplished in the bulletin that the board previously approved was an attempt to align the definition of dyslexia with enacted legislation at the county. So that is one of the things that we try to do, updating the characteristics of dyslexia as well as something that we attempted to do. And this all happened through the dyslexia work group, as well as the Early Literacy Commission, which endorsed the bulletin that was previously brought before you. And so, our recommendation is, that obviously hear the concerns, also appreciating that there isn't consistent appreciation across both the medical and educational community in this state and nationwide on how best to address this particular issue. And so I think what you're hearing today, and rightfully and thankfully so, are just some of the variances in belief systems around how to best serve students with characteristics of dyslexia, and also probably what I'm hearing too is a request for additional screening and intervention based on that screening. And that's what I'm hearing. There was legislation filed a couple of years ago around this, but that particular legislation did not pass that mandated a screening or an intervention.
So another question then is, when we're doing screening in our schools today and assessments, and we're doing the plan of care for that student as we move them through the literacy process, so based on her comments, does that mean we don't have the CULT and the CULT people doing those assessments, so the certified individuals, or we have someone else doing our assessments and developing the plans?
No, the issue there is there aren't enough of these people throughout the state with this particular skill set. Whenever, again, not a dyslexia expert, but whenever we're talking about identifying characteristics of dyslexia, I don't know that there's a consistent agreement that one particular screener completely identifies that the child is dyslexic. It's an important tool to help in that identification in concert with teacher observation, parental feedback, a number of different factors. We're talking a lot about screeners in terms of literacy, but that particular screener that we're talking about isn't exactly one that would recognize if a child is dyslexic. That's a different type of screener.
Could I make a comment? But back to one of your questions about the instructional availability of teachers. The state of Louisiana hasn't, up until like the last year, provided any type of process in higher education for the development of these therapists. The therapists that you see currently in the state right now have gone outside of the state to get their therapeutic certification. We go to Texas, we go to Mississippi, we go to Arkansas. The current certification process that does exist here now is still a collaborative process between a local institution and a college in Pennsylvania. So their higher ed here does not offer any options for that type of training. And then to your question about screening, so there actually are a couple of screeners that are what I earlier referred to as more comprehensive, in that they add additional markers of what dyslexia looks like, especially in a young child, in a kindergartner and first grader. And again, when you're talking about screening, you're talking about looking for those significant deficits in those flags that say, okay, we need to take the screener to the next level of assessment. Because what's happening is that the screener may or may not get done, to be honest with you, and there's no accountability to report these screening results, so that certainly doesn't help. But again, if you have schools right now that are screening, you have teachers and you have professionals looking at the information, but they don't really know what they're looking for. And that draws me back to recognizing that there actually are dyslexia practitioners and therapists, by the thousands all over the country who have been strategically put into other state legislation to be the instructors for these children.
In the material that was provided, I've already read that 1 in 5 students potentially could have some dyslexia. Is that right?
That's correct. That was largely, really substantiated by the Connecticut longitudinal study that was done. I don't want to get dates wrong. Late 90s, and it was.
That's accepted by the education industry, if you will.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then I was curious about at what age dyslexia could be identified.
So, for the one that's really looking for it, you can actually see symptoms of it in preschool children. Unfortunately, as a parent, and I understand this, parents, even teachers, they want to excuse it. It's developmental. It's they're immature. All kinds of reasons. But you actually can see these symptoms, and you can see them actually just flourish, even at a kindergarten level when there's not really a strong academic push, but you can see it in simple things like them not learning letters, not telling the difference between a letter and a number.
And is there a critical point in addressing this concern of dyslexia as the child matures? So if you catch it by first grade, you've got a 90% chance of success as opposed catch it by third grade.
Yes. Well, and again, I say that I'm glad that the bulletin has that all kindergartners need to be screened, because they absolutely do. But statistics tell us that if a child has not been remediated by the third grade, that they will potentially lag behind their peers for the rest of their academic years. And then the process of actually trying to remediate after third grade becomes very difficult.
Thank you for that. Members, other comments?
I'd just like to say that perhaps as a board, we need to have a future conversation about the need for individuals who are actually certified in academic language therapy or certified academic language practitioners. Just because to me this seems like, because what I heard Superintendent Brumley as you talk, we don't have enough of these. And so then are there things that we could be doing as a department to incentivize teachers to receive these types of certifications or go back to school? Because it's a similar thing. We don't require our English as a second language teachers to be certified to be English as a second language teachers because there aren't enough of them. But that doesn't mean that the certification doesn't have value and might be better for us to be requiring. And so perhaps we need to think about in our conversations with how we're talking to our education schools about the things that we really need in our state. Perhaps this is an issue that we need to discuss with them. Because dyslexia, until I had family members diagnosed with it, I had no idea that there were multiple types of dyslexia, that you could have more than one of them simultaneously. And, I'm fortunate that my niece and nephew are being raised in the state of Mississippi, where they have, some very good dyslexic schools that specialize in dyslexia, where they started out in reading in the 5th percentile, and by the time they were in the 5th grade, they were in the 75th percentile because of the qualifications of the people that were providing their interventions and their therapies. So maybe we can have some conversations about what we should be doing as a state to do this better.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. Members, other comments? President Holloway?
Yeah, I think I need clarity, Dr. Romney, on this request, where it's coming from, basically, is it from public? I'm trying to follow.
Ms. Davis, can you help us out?
And it's asking to receive, authorize, direct. I like the suggestion that Dr. Davis asked about future discussion. Help me understand.
So this is, excuse me, Ms. Holloway. This is, once the board approves a policy and it goes out on notice of intent, it's open for public comment for a period of 20 days. The board received 3 public comments. When that happens, it comes back to the board for the board to see the comments and decide if they want to revise the previously approved policy. So that is what we're doing here, and the recommendation from the department is to proceed with the notice of intent based on the comments received. Recommendation is to still proceed with the previously approved notice of intent. So that's what we're doing here. Y'all are receiving those comments as required by law, and then if you chose not to go with the superintendent's recommendation, you could revise, not bulletin 1903, and then would have to go back through the process all over again.
Ms. Holloway, I would also add to that, our recommendation around this is because this is the endorsements and recommendations of the Dyslexia Task Force that actually built this policy, as well as, the Early Literacy Commission that also viewed this policy. There are, Ms. Petty today provided great information and testimony, but there are varying viewpoints around some of these key issues that even some of the professionals haven't really settled on. And so the policy that we're bringing forward to you today is the one that was endorsed by the full Dyslexia Task Force that works with trying to improve outcomes for students with characteristics of dyslexia.
That background knowledge helps.
Members, other comments? I just want to state I'm a little concerned. There's in fact 1 in 5 students are potentially impacted by dyslexia. Just like to feel a little more warm and fuzzy that we do have a system in place today that can help the children in our new K-2 literacy plan to be identified. Can you speak to that, Dr. Ron? I'm trying to get warm and fuzzy here, right?
Yeah, I'm sorry, that task force has not always been warm and fuzzy, because this is not something where there is consensus, and it hasn't been solved nationwide, and, you know, I don't know that I have solved it either. I mean, there are varying viewpoints. I mean, even, you know, Ms. Betty's comments, which I think are spot on around the screening, being able to pick up targets of a student potentially with characteristics of dyslexia at a very early age. You have other individuals who would come to the table and say, no, it just takes time developmentally for a child to work through some of those issues. And it might be first grade, for instance, when we could actually say, yeah, the student has characteristics of dyslexia. So there are just different viewpoints on this particular issue. And so that's what we have to be mindful of, and I think we have to continue to explore and follow science and research on this thing to try to figure out what is best practice.
I really appreciate Dr. Davis's comments about Mississippi, what Mississippi's doing. Could we ask the department to follow up with and help us to better understand the difference between what Mississippi's doing and what Louisiana's doing in this particular area?
Yeah, I mean, I think more of our look at Mississippi has been around the fact that, you know, if you look at states across the entire country and you look at NAEP results, and over the last couple of years, and you look across the nation, there are a group of states where literacy results have fallen. We're in that number. There are a group of states where literacy results have held constant. And there is one state in the nation where literacy results have improved, that being Mississippi. And that is why, you know, we have explored, we have looked at some of the things that Mississippi is doing, and, you know, many of the things in which we're trying to do align to that. I think there are areas where we're actually being more aggressive or assertive than Mississippi, but we're happy to continue to study this particular topic and look to see if there are solutions or areas where we might further improve.
Thank you, sir. Members, any other comment? We have a motion before the board and an exception to the motion. No exception heard. Motion passes. Next item, please.
This concludes your agenda.